Hi, my name is Michael Gilmore from WhizBang's blog, and I'm the co-founder of parklogic.com. And this is the second video I'll be doing, which relates to my keynote address at NamesCon 2020 in Austin, Texas. The previous video related to sales, past, present, and future. And this time we'll be taking a look at traffic monetization, the past and present. And then later on in another video, we'll look at the future. So without further ado, let me just get things started and all happening. So domains, past, present, and the future. So looking at traffic, past and present, a match made in heaven. The thing to understand about domain monetization is that advertising aggregators combined with the traffic aggregators. Now, advertising aggregators are like Google and Yahoo and so forth. They're combined with the advertising aggregators of parking companies. And in the middle there, you had domain investors. Domain investors were the linchpin between the two, where they learned how to find domain names with traffic. And that was an awesome thing. I remember those days when you'd be stumbling across the ground and you'd suddenly find like a gold nugget of a domain. In fact, it's so much so that I thought I'd just relate this whole domain monetization to the gold rush. I remember back in the old days in the gold rush, they first found gold literally lying on the ground. And what we're going to be looking at is similar to the gold rush, domain monetization has gone through a technological evolution. So back in those old days, you'd have, if you wanted to monetize your traffic, you'd have a parking company, you'd set the name servers on your domain, and then the parking company would produce a page. You'd hopefully get a click. Gee, I really hope to get a click, and a payment with the result. I remember, and I will never forget it, my very first click, and that was for 10 cents. And I remember the domain bigpap.com. It got a 10-cent click, and I knew exactly what I needed to do, and that was to get more of these domains. So that was the early years, and you had weird and wonderful pages back in 2003. There's an example of Netstore of just pages of links. Then we had a situation where you had like suddenly the link on the page says, hey, this domain might be for sale, which is pretty cool. Look, horrible looking pages. Then Cedo actually came out with a really good looking page. One problem was the performance went right down. In fact, there was an atrocious page that a company called Domain Sponsor used to have. It was a brown page with like, it looked half broken. It was a mess, but boy, did it perform. For some reason, people just clicked on those links. And you know what? When you're in the pay-per-click or PPC game, what you want is those clicks. So this went back to looking pretty boring until finally nowadays in 2020, a two-click lander may look like, say, one of these two. In fact, this one here is from Parking Crew, and this is a single click once you go through the first click. But it looks a horrible page. Don't judge a page on the way it looks. So many domain investors go, oh, I don't want those horrible-looking things. No, I'm more in love with my bank account than I am with something that looks pretty. So I'm after the one that gives me the biggest yield. And trust me, a huge amount of effort has gone on to getting the best yielding pages. Okay, so if we take a look here at evolutions going forward once again, and we have the innovation of the gold pan. So people began panning for gold in the gold rush. And likewise, the first stage of optimization was between improving CTR, where the parking companies would then say a one-click lander or a two-click lander, or let's match the keywords so we can better match the advertiser with the traffic itself. And once again, we're trying to get a click and a payment. The next stage of optimization, the gold rush, is if you can have one solution, why not have many? So you had domain investors such as myself. We had parking accounts with all the different companies, had massive spreadsheets and so forth like that. And we would set the DNS for each company. And we then built a feedback loop in and said which one performed the best for which domain. and I'd be processing these massive spreadsheets every single day, moving my domains all over the place. To be quite blunt with you, it was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. So, but it was the next stage in the optimization process. So the domain name gold rush continues. A new innovation called the sluice came into being. So what does that look like in the domain name space? We had a concept known as the rotator. The rotator would equally split the traffic across multiple packing solutions. And these multiple packing solutions, we're hoping to get more clicks, high-paying clicks, payments, and so forth. And once again, we would bring all the information back to the rotator, feed it in to be able to work out which one produced the highest yield. This is an automated process. And let me tell you, it got rid of those spreadsheets, and I, for one, was really, really happy about that. So that's rotating. Now, there's a lot of drawbacks of rotating, as we'll see. But what rotating brought in was the concept of revenue per 1,000 visitors. So revenue per 1,000 visitors is revenue divided by uniques times 1,000. Now, this was an innovation at the time. You may say, well, it doesn't seem that innovative now. Back then it was. And one of the problems we had was in the comparison of one parking solution versus another parking solution was there was a lack of standards. So everyone communicated or calculated their uniques differently from one another, which is an absolute pain in the neck. So you couldn't compare a Cedo versus a domain sponsor back in those days versus a Smart Name or a Voodoo or any of these other companies. You just couldn't do it. It was impossible. So in came the normalized RPM. The normalized RPM was a little bit different. It was revenue divided by URLs or raw traffic times 1,000. And it was completely different. So you'd end up counting every single piece of traffic you send to every single monetization solution, and then you see how much revenue that generated. And then you could calculate which solution brought you the best results. And that was a huge innovation. Now, a couple of things about this. To be effective, a normalized RPM needs to be calculated in comparable, statistically significant periods of time for every revenue source for every domain. That's a lot of data points. As soon as you have more and more monetization solutions, you have lots more data points. So that was a great innovation. Now, to give you an idea of just a bit of ParkLogic's formula, this is it here. That's our normalized RPM. And some of you are looking at that going, oh my goodness gracious, it's quite complicated. That's not quite the full formula or anything like that. It's a bit messed up in some ways. But so someone says to you, oh, I know what RPM is. Well, do they really know what it is? And that's why, as we move forward in time, technology is getting better in the gold rush. And so we now have some modern machinery happening. So we took the rotator, and the rotator then said, you know what I want to do? I want to introduce direct advertisers. This was a massive step forward. So direct advertisers enter the market. So the direct advertiser would real-time bid on the traffic. And then you had the parking companies, hopefully get a click. And you had a payment that would go direct from direct advertiser to the payment solution, or obviously the parking solutions. And there would be a feedback loop to work out which is better, parking, direct advertisers, and there's some very, very sophisticated algorithms right there trying to work at all that. Incredibly sophisticated algorithms. In fact, the floor price for the real-time auction system is typically the best parking solution. So we're taking the next step of trying to extract more value from the traffic. Or in the case of the gold rush, we're throwing more dirt into the hopper and trying to refine things to get that gold out. All right, now, once again, there is another innovation that came along. And rather than digging on the surface with our bulldozers, we're now drilling into the Earth's crust 3 miles deep to try to find that seam of gold in the traffic. So what's going on here? Rather than having a rotator, which it ends up having problems around revenue loss from sampling and so forth like that, we now introduce the concept of sophisticated algorithms. These algorithms really make all the difference. If you ever have someone who talks to you about rotating, I know that ParkLogic, we don't rotate, we do algorithmic switching. It's the next level above. And every time we get some traffic from someone or domains from someone who does puts them on a rotator, they bring them to us, we know we get a bump up in revenue with them simply because it's a better methodology. So yet another metric was involved in this process. So let me show you an example with the whole issue around direct advertisers. It's really, the problem is comparing spot prices versus average prices. See, when you look at an EPC, or earnings per click, as an example here, and I'm about to show you, for a domain, it's across a period of time. So it may be that it's 5 cents. So your EPC for the domain is 5 cents. The spot price is, it could be 7 cents. So let's imagine you have a direct advertiser says, I'm going to offer you 7 cents for that traffic. You'd say, well, 7 cents is more than 5 cents. I should take it. But should you? Maybe not. Because that 5 cents is made up of a 1 cent click, a 5 cent click, and a 9 cent click. What happens if the direct advertiser offers you 7 cents, but only for the 9 cent clicks? That means that there's a net loss. So how do you actually unpack that and get around that problem? That's a big, big issue, because you actually don't know the numbers 1, 5, and 9. You can only intimate that what they are. And that was a really large project in itself, and that's a simplistic version. Can you imagine if you got many, many monetization partners and averages and all that sort of stuff, and everyone's counting things differently? So that was a tough nut to crack. So is all the technical innovation really worth it? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. To give you an idea, this next chart summarizes it. So Google versus direct advertisers across the last 2 years. Google is the little tiny graph, blue graph down the bottom, that's barely moving at all up and down. It's paying very little for the traffic, but you compare it against the direct advertisers, a huge amount in comparison. Now, here's the issue. You may say, well, we'll throw everything at the direct advertisers. That would be great. But the problem is that direct advertisers only typically operate in certain verticals, market verticals. Compared to Google, there's a breadth of advertisers. So Google is invaluable for monetizing domain traffic. And that's a really, really important point to understand. So Google is invaluable, but combine that with the EPC punch of direct advertising, you've got a really good solution. Okay, so let's take a look at Google versus direct advertisers across the last couple of years once again. And you can see there that where Google is in the blue running and the direct advertisers are the orange line just there, of the percentage of traffic they win. So at one point, about halfway through this chart, you can see the direct advertisers were winning more traffic than Google was winning, which was very surprising. But then Google obviously fought back, and now it's winning more than the direct advertisers. And so you'll find that there's this constant tug of war between both camps as they're trying to jostle with each other to win more of the traffic, but for the appropriate levels of pricing and so forth. Now, here's a question I get asked all the time, and that is, who is the best Google parking company? So who's the best company? So I thought I'd just take a look at a particular client, actually this is real data, and who have just their traffic going to the Google parking companies. They didn't want any direct advertisers for this particular portfolio, and to see who's the best. There's a few things you'll notice about this data. It's parking company 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is the first thing is this: no one wins more than 30%. So forget the direct advertisers. If you have all of your traffic with a single parking company, then 70% of the time, at the best case scenario, you could be doing better elsewhere. I need to repeat that. If you have all of your traffic with one parking company, 70% of the time, you could be doing better elsewhere. That's the first point. Next thing, there's a lot of variability between those charts. They cross in between, in and out. Now, the red one's not so much for different particular reasons, but everyone also wins all the time. The fact that there's a red line that's not along zero says that they're still winning a chunk of the traffic. So everyone's winning all of the time in this particular example. It's next to impossible to run manual traffic tests. If you want to run a manual traffic test, good luck. But that's why you need to have a solution like the algorithmic switching. Without the algorithmic switching, you're really in strife doing it manually. Like, to be quite blunt with you, I have no idea how you would do that anymore. All parking companies are good at different points in time. They're all good. So when someone says to me, hey, which is the best parking company? You've got all the data, Michael. My reaction is, they're all good. They're all good at different points in time for different domains. And it changes over time as well, for whatever reason. So they're all good. And so if you're thinking, oh, I wish I could just know, is it one or the other or something like that? No, they're all good. So that's who's the best parking company. Now let's take a look at this as an example, as a case study. This is real data for a client. And in this real data for the client, you can see the red line there is the average 7 day. That's the moving average every 7 days, just to smooth things out a bit so we can see it more clearly, the points. So in the first part, there was full optimization. So we were doing full optimization on this client. You can see it slowly climbing upwards as it came out of the doldrums of the Northern Hemisphere summer. And then it kicked upwards a little bit there as well in about mid-October. Then the client said, I actually don't believe these numbers. I think there's something fishy about them. So I said, oh, okay, well, all right. So they asked, can we re-baseline the traffic? So we returned all the traffic. And we can do this, by the way. We returned all the traffic directly to where it was previously to re-baseline it. Find out, how was that particular individual parking solution performing? And so we did that for a while, and you can see it suddenly dropped off the edge of a cliff. And then I think the client got sick to death of those numbers, and they said, can you turn back to the full optimization? So we restored it, and you can see it began just climbing up again. This is a classic example that we see over and over again. So what was the overall uplift? If we compare the latest 7-day period versus the baseline period, then it's a 52% uplift in revenue. So is all this technology worth it? Absolutely. But wait, it gets a bit better still. This is an interesting chart. This is a chart where we compare the baseline traffic data, traffic data versus the latest 7 days. And we bring it back to a daily, so they're directly comparable. And what you can see is that if you look at this greater than 80% mark just there, what we're saying is this, is that for domains that get at least 80% of the traffic of the baseline, how well did all this technology perform? It was 89%. There was an 89% uplift. That's a massive uplift. So if you're saying to yourself, you know what, I'm down here with a single provider, or even you're optimizing yourself or using a rotator or something like that, what you're doing is you're down the technology curve. And to be quite blunt with you, if you're down at the bottom end there and you're saying to yourself, well, what I'd like to be able to do is sell my portfolio, then we'll have buyers just queuing up to buy your portfolio, because what they'll do is they'll buy on your revenue numbers, and then they'll put it into algorithmic switching, and they'll get the payback in no time. So it's much, much better for them. So you get hugely greater returns. So is it worth it? Absolutely. So don't forget, with your own portfolio, there's no reason why you can't just give us a call. As an example, I'm not trying to do a sales pitch here, I'm just being matter of fact about it. But give us a call, reach out. If you're doing more than $250 a month in revenue, then we're very interested in talking with you. because we can take that 250 and begin to multiply it up. And that's what we do for one client after another client. In fact, we've been doing this for 13 years. That's at ParkLogic. So I hope you enjoyed this past and present view of the of traffic monetization. In my next video, we'll be looking at the future. And what does the future look like for the domain industry? And sure, it'll be my take on it, but I hope you enjoy it. Anyway, thanks a lot for that, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment, ask questions, and like the video. Thank you. Bye.